Here's a faster format video of a RV storage bin. It's almost like an ottoman. I'm just going to walk you through the process of disassembling and making a new cover for the outside and the reassembly. The interior panels are held in with brad nails. They're relatively short, and my preferred method is just using a chisel and a hammer to just break them loose and then slowly pry away each panel. What you'll also notice me doing is once the pedals are off, you'll see me label them 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then I'll do that on the inside of the box as well. So removing the old cover is a pretty simple process. I use a razor blade and just cut right above the old staple line. Most of the old material is going to get pulled over and it's never seen anyways, so there's no need to sit and pull out each individual staple when doing this. Then you'll flip over and repeat the same process on the bottom. Here I'm taking measurements for the patterns I'm going to have to create. While doing this, it's important to remember to make sure you account for seam allowance so that whenever you're sewing, you're not going to make your covers too small or too large. Once the cover's off, what you'll see me do is pull out some of the remaining staples around the middle section of the ottoman. This is because I intended on making a cover that isn't stapled. It's only going to be a French seam. This is by request of the customer. So I'm going to repair the foam and remove any sort of edges that may damage the cover once I install the new one. Here what you'll see me do is most of the furniture that is in RVs is poorly made just to keep cost effectiveness. The foam isn't attached, and I don't like that it has the possibility to move once a new cover is installed, especially since I'm not stapling the middle line, so I'm gluing everything down and securing it before I move on to making the patterns. Pattern making is just as it sounds. It's basically cutting out shapes like if you were in 3rd grade again with safety scissors, except for this time you have to be able to know how to read a ruler. So all the measurements I took before I took the cover off with the added seam allowance, I'm going to be doing that now. So when it comes to foam backing material, a lot of the time it's needed just because nothing is perfect when it comes to the upholstery industry. We just try to get as close as we can. So a lot of what we do is either back it with the thinnest amount of foam not to mess up the dimensions, or we add thicker foam that's more firm to keep the shape. What you're seeing here is I'm using a spray glue. It's a contact adhesive. It's the industry standard for pretty much every trimmer I know. And you spray both sides, you let it tack up, and then it'll bond to itself. Once everything's been foam backed and trimmed for the second time, now it's time to move on to the fun part where we sew everything together. Out of personal preference, I prefer to do all of the joining seams first. While it isn't always possible to do that, with this specific piece it is. So once everything's been joined, a French seam is added for decorative purposes, and so that it lays better whenever it's installed. If you can catch it, what you'll see me do is at the end of each stitch, I'll burn the ends with a lighter after I trim them as closely as I can, and that's to prevent them from fraying or coming undone. Now that all the decorative stitches have been finished, I'm going to sew all 4 of the pieces for the perimeter of the new cover together. So the assembly process is a little easier. What you'll see me do is trim all 4 sides from where it's sewn together. The seam allowance, if it's not trimmed, will create a ridge that doesn't look very pleasant once it's assembled. So now the assembly part begins, where I have to line up all the center lines. I do a test fit at all 4 corners to make sure the seams where they join are going to be perfectly straight and lined up where the seams are on the wooden box. I usually do a technique that I've discovered myself called a north, south, east, and west technique, which is just stapling the center line of all 4 sides and then working my way towards the corners. This material happens to be a marine vinyl, so it's a little bit thicker and harder to work with, but I use a heat gun set to about 450 just for a few seconds, not to where it's going to change the texture or start to bubble the material, but it works to mold the corners tight enough to where you don't have any sort of overlapping or really harsh wrinkles. After repeating the process for the bottom side of the box, you'll see me go through and trim off all the excess again.
that's going to make it easier to reinstall those wooden panels that we used the chisel to remove in the very beginning. So to put these panels in, it was a bit of a challenge. The challenge was that the original brad nails I was using were shorter, and they were too short to where I couldn't hold them in between my fingers. So I had to use a pair of needle nose pliers to hold them just enough to set them, and then finish driving them in. The last step is to add the roller wheels. These all use the same screws and hardware that they were removed with. I didn't replace anything, it wasn't rusted or stripped out. So putting the 4 wheels back on, I'll give it a test roll, see how everything works, and then put the top on that I made at a later date.